Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of our podcast, Is Breakfast Included? How you guys doing? I hope everyone had a great holiday and a happy new year, and I'm glad you're here for the first episode of 2023. Wow, we made it. On the show today is my good friend Aidan Mullen. Aiden is a guitar tech, bass tech, and guitar player who's been in this business for over 30 years, playing guitar for such artists as Eddie Money and Collin Raye. He's been a guitar tech or bass tech for the likes of the Eric Martin Band, Aerosmith. He's currently Rick Savage's bass tech on Def Leppard. He's been in that role for many years. He also guitar teched for a band called Metallica. You guys may have heard of him. Anyway, he shared a story about Metallica that he doesn't talk about very much publicly. I was very honored that he chose this forum to talk about it. You'll have to listen, but it's not a happy story. Anyway, at the end of this episode, you hear us saying Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday and stuff like that. That's because we recorded it right before Christmas, and I chose to leave all that in because it was just a good conversation. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Let's check it out. Tell everyone who you are.
Well, my name is Aidan Mullen, and I have been a guitar or bass tech for, a long while. And I'm currently employed by Rick Savage with Def Leppard.
Right on, man. When did you start in this business?
1984. I was living in Northern California, and I was working for what could be described as a high-tech startup in the Silicon Valley area. It hadn't been named that yet. But I read BAM magazine back then, Bay Area Music Magazine, and it was kind of like a local entertainment newspaper for the San Francisco Bay Area. And I always started with the classifieds, looking to see guitars for sale and things going on. And of course, I played in bands since I was 13 years old. And I saw a little tiny ad that said the Eric Martin Band, which was a very popular high-level club band back in the mid 80s.
Yeah, Eric Martin, Mr. Big, right?
Mr. Big, yes.
Yeah.
The Eric Martin Band is looking for a guitar roadie. And I'm on my lunch break, and I'm reading this little ad, and I'm looking around me. I've got my soldering iron and my cutters and pliers, and resistors and capacitors and wires and all this crap laid out in front of me at work. And then I thought, well, I could tune a guitar. I know what one is supposed to sound like when it's in tune, and I certainly can fix one. I'll give this guy a call. And the name on the ad was Zeke Clark, and I don't know if that name rings any bells. Zeke actually now works for Kenny Chesney and resides in the Nashville area, kind of near me.
I met Zeke when he was with Leanne Rimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's got Sammy Hagar experience, Van Halen experience, bunch of others, but he was kind of like Eric's right-hand man.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think I would be able to get him to call me back from this ad. Not a chance. And so I did some investigating, and I learned that Eric was handled by a gentleman named Sandy Einstein that worked for Nightmare Management with Herbie Herbert, who, also Journey and a lot of other talented folks. So I called Sandy at his office. He didn't know who I was. And I said, look, man, this guy Zeke is not returning my calls. And I want this job. What do I need to do? And he said, you give me a couple of hours, and then I want you to call him again. and I did. And he had spoken to Zeke in the meantime. And they ended up hiring me. So I started off with Eric and the other fellas making $50 a show, gave up my lucrative career at this high-tech startup, and never looked back. Just started doing clubs in Northern California and then down to Southern California. And then a few months later, Eric broke the band up, decided to do a solo thing. So Zeke got us together, the two of us, a gig with another Bay Area band called Billy Satellite, who had a record out at the time that actually had a single on the radio, Satisfy Me. And also on that record was a song that the singer wrote called I Want to Go Back, which became a huge radio hit for Eddie Money.
Yeah.
So Zeke and I went out. We got in a Ryder truck and drove equipment from Petaluma, California to Atlanta, Georgia, and did our first show opening for Night Ranger. And that was 1984, man. That was Midnight Madness.
Yeah.
And that was me on my way,
No, not looking back.
Not looking back, not for a minute.
So this high-tech startup that you left, is it someone we had heard of or a company
Nope.
we've heard of now?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. They went under shortly thereafter.
So you made the right call.
Yes, I did. Everything happens for a reason, man. I'm a firm believer in that. You can call it kismet or karma or whatever else, but the only reason I did this, I should qualify why I wanted to do it in the first place, is because at this point in 1984, I was, what would I have been then? 20, something like that. 22. I always wanted to play guitar for a living, for my career. I used to drive my folks nuts with it. And I started playing in earnest at 13. So the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, was not an easy place for an unknown newcomer, whatever you wanted to call it, to break into that scene, So this was a way for me to break into the scene, and one thing leads to another, as it does. And, quite a few years later, I actually had the opportunity to play guitar and play bass for the better part of 7 years in my transitionary period, I guess you'd call it, moving from the Bay Area to Nashville. I did about 3.5 years with Eddie Money. Started off with his acoustic show and worked our way back into the electric segment and ended up switching to bass at that point, another instrument that I'd futzed about with. And then after moving to Nashville, I took a gig, not knowing anybody here, but one of my best friends, Brian Gary, who was in Eddie's band with me, had moved down here. And his wife one day called me and said, there's this guy named Collin Raye that needs a guitar tech. I know it's not a playing gig, but he's a great guy and he's a great singer. I was familiar with him. Ended up getting that gig. And a couple of months into it, one day I was called into the back lounge of the bus and thought I was getting fired. But instead, I was told that I would be becoming a band member and they would hire another tech to take my place.
All right on, man.
So I spent another 3+ years with Collin Raye here in Nashville at a time in his career where he was just churning out number ones, man. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Early mid 90s.
Yeah, he was huge then, man. But
I wish he had been as enthusiastic about interfacing with the fans, because he was kind of I don't know how you describe it. He super talented, amazing texture to his voice, but just I got the impression that he just didn't thoroughly enjoy what we were doing. And he would be consistently late and I'm not at all trying to slag the guy. I love him to death. I haven't spoken to him in a while, but he's had some hardship in his life, and who's to say, but I did thoroughly enjoy both of those experiences, and that was the reason I bring it up, is because I'm equally as happy now doing what I'm doing, not playing, but working for some top-notch fellas. I do my best to enjoy what I do,
Yeah. Well, I mean, Eddie Money, Collin, Raye, those names are huge, especially at the time when you
Yep.
were performing with them. What was the first tech gig you got with like a huge major, like what coming out of Collin, Raye? Is that when you
Oh,
started your tech work again?
well, no, yes and no. Yeah. That is when I started the tech work again. I would say things started happening for me fairly rapidly, I guess. In the beginning, once we were done with Billy Satellite, we ended up doing the remainder of the Midnight Madness tour with Night Ranger, and then we jumped immediately onto the Jefferson Starship nuclear furniture tour. And again, that was, Find Your Way Back and all that stuff was,
Yeah.
all over the radio. So we did that for another few months, came home, and then that was kind of it. Billy Satellite sort of took a break. We're contemplating another record, I think, at that point. And, we need to work. And I got a call asking me if I'd be interested in working for Y&T.
Okay.
And Y&T at the time this would have been by that time, summer of 1985.
Yeah. Summertime Girls.
Summertime Girls.
They were a Bay
Exactly
Area
right.
band, yeah?
Yep. East Bay, Oakland, San Leandro, that kind of area. And another one of my favorites back when I was learning how to play, Dave Menichetti, man.
Yeah.
And I saw them when they were called Yesterday and Today. I saw them at Winterland in San Francisco. And one of the few times in my entire life where I went out the next day and actually bought a record based on a show I'd seen. And they were a favorite of mine. So I was, again, my first gig with them is at Day on the Green in Oakland.
Wow.
And we're backstage. It was Scorpions were the headliner, and Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force was on it. And we were up the ramp. This is at Oakland Stadium where the A's play baseball still to this day. And I heard this just egregious cacophony of noise. And my musical tastes were always very polished. A huge Journey fan when I was a kid in the Bay Area.
Uh-huh.
Huge Boston fan. Styx was another one back in the day. So I was into the slickly, produced melodic, nice rock and roll, and so I hear this noise, and I'm compelled at this point to walk down the ramp out onto the stage to see what in God's name everybody's listening to. And it was Metallica. And I didn't know what to make.
The Day on the Green Metallica?
Day on the Green Metallica, yeah. It was the day that they got in trouble with Bill Graham for trashing their dressing room, among other things. And I just remember at that point thinking, oh, my God, there's nothing about this that I understand. And that was literally it. And then I want to say 2 or 3 months later, I get a call from Adam Day, who is a friend of mine, has been since the old Y&T days. We worked together with Y&T. And he said, hey, Metallica have called and asked me if I want to work for them. And I'm real happy working with David. And I believe he was on retainer, and I wasn't. So I was just on a per gig basis, and they weren't working a lot. So the next thing you know, Bobby Schneider's calling me, and we're talking. And the next day I'm put on the phone with James Hetfield, and we talk for a few minutes. And again, I'm, early 20s at this point, both of us. We're pretty much the same age.
Mm-hmm.
We have a long conversation on the phone. And then the next day I get another call from Bobby saying, we're going to fly you to Nashville or Knoxville, wherever it was. We're opening for Ozzy Osbourne, and we'd like you to come out and work for us. And that's how that happened.
So that was the Ultimate Sin tour, right?
It was.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. and they were winding down at that point. They had a couple of weeks left in the States, and then very little time to get together. And then I was told we'd be going to the UK and Ireland and Europe. And I was excited because I spent a lot of time in Ireland growing up and always love it there. But I had never been to continental Europe, certainly. So I was very excited about that. So we all got on a Pan Am flight from San Francisco and flew over and began rehearsals in Birmingham in a little theater there, and got to know those guys real well, and didn't really know Cliff very well. But when we flew over, he was a smoker, and I was the new guy, and they needed somebody to sit in the smoking section with him on the airplane. So I got the nod. And
back when there was a smoking section.
Back when there was a smoking section, yeah, 747. And Bobby, last week, I brought that up, and he says, "No, there's no way that I would have done that to you." And I said, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Oh, it must have been a wind-up." And I go, "Well, whatever it was, I sat next to Cliff for that flight, and had to endure, being surrounded by people puffing away. And I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, and it was pretty awful. But it was also the time that I got to know Cliff. And by the time we got off that plane, I would like to think that we were friends at that point, which was awesome. I found him to be very different than his persona, and I think that, his outward appearance and attitude and aggression isn't the right word, because that's a negative word. This was more of a positive, aggressive,
confidence,
but a tough confidence.
Yeah, an aggressive confidence.
Yeah. And but when you'd sit down with him, that wasn't the person you were sitting down talking to. It was just like a calm, normal, well-adjusted, easygoing, laid-back guy, And so my opinion of him at that point changed forever. And of course, we went over to Europe, and they were on fire, man. They were poised to do it at that point. All indicators were that this was going to be, one of the biggest bands in the world at some point. And they were just a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
So, we went over there and we did our rehearsals, and all went well. We started our tour. We got through England, Scotland, Ireland, and then got over to Scandinavia. And unfortunately, at that point, things went horribly wrong. And, as there was a bus crash that took Cliff's life. And I was on that bus with him, as we were all on the bus. It was band and, basic crew on that bus together. And everything changed in the blink of an eye. And Bobby Schneider, again, talking about this for the first time ever, publicly. Friends and family, we've discussed it over the years, but and invariably at a show or somewhere, somebody will come up and say, "I just realized that you're that guy."
Yeah.
I was injured in the accident and spent a few days in hospital there before I had a chance to fly home. And by the time I got out of the hospital, everybody was long gone. Everybody was home already. Peter Mensch, Metallica's one of their two managers actually flew to Sweden and rented a car and drove me to, when I got out of the hospital, drove me to Copenhagen and got me onto a plane the next day and got me home.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was a horrible, unexpected, tragic, what I thought was an end to something that had so much promise.
Yeah.
And again, you know, speaking with Bobby and I've never had this conversation with anybody in their organization other than last week on Joel's podcast. Bobby and I were guests together,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I would tell him, I would say things that I remembered, and he would say things that he remembered, and we kind of put it all together. And I owe him literally my life, because I was in the process of suffocating under the bus when he saw my feet kicking and realized that I was under this pile of rubble, and he was leaning in through the emergency hatch. The bus was on its side at that point, and reached in and started pulling blankets and pillows and suitcases and crap off of me, off of my head. And when the light, it was morning at that point, early morning, and when the light finally came into where I was pinned under this coach, I realized that there was a fellow laying next to me, and I realized it was Cliff. And about the only thing I remember verbally from and after that, it kind of, I remember them trying to lift the bus up and dropped it again, and cutting and dragging and all that goes along with it. But I remember Bobby saying to me, "Relax, you know, we're going to get you out of there." And I said, "Bobby, help me so that I can help Cliff." And the last thing I remember him saying was, "Don't worry about Cliff. We'll take care of him." And that's when I realized that we had a pretty major issue.
Yeah.
You know, but that's how that all transpired. And weeks later, all of a sudden, we're looking for a bass player. They've decided to pick up the pieces and go with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the rest of that is history. We met Jason. I actually picked him up at the airport for his audition.
Wow.
So to this day, we speak to each other now and again. But I knew in my heart the day that I met him that he was going to be the guy. And I'm happy to know that I was right.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. If you don't, how long did you stay with the band after?
So after we did Jason's first run, Japan and then, you know, back to Europe and States and stuff, I opted to leave. I decided at that point, and I spoke with Bobby about it, and I said, "Look, I really need to try. I really need to try playing for my food, for my rent, for my, you know, I need to try it. It's what I've always wanted to do. And I need to, you know, I'm very careful to keep the two things separate, because I feel that they need to be separate."
Mm-hmm.
So Bobby said, "What do you want to do? Do you think you want to leave?" And I said, "You know, I think I have to leave right now." So I did. And next thing you know, at that point, I was living up in Northern California, up in Sonoma County. And I got a job at Mesa Boogie. of all places, in Petaluma, California. And before you know it, I was on the phone as their artist relations rep, talking to rock stars, helping their techs with technical issues on the phone, going to shows, demoing gear for people. So it was a cool gig. And then shortly thereafter, I got the Eddie Money gig. So it all kind of worked,
Yeah.
a little bit. And then, the Eddie Money time with Eddie Money, man, was like being in the best top 40 band in the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
Every song's a toe tapper, and I was a fan of his. So I thoroughly enjoyed every minute that I had with that band.
Yeah.
I made some great friends, people that I'm close to this day, and got a chance to show myself that I had at least a little bit of what it takes to be able to do that. And then towards the end of my tenure there, I met my wife in Toledo, Ohio, at an Eddie Money gig. And so at that point, she moved out to California. Things weren't going great with the gig. We were doing some crappy places, and attitudes were changing a little bit. People were getting a little bit grumpy, and so when my then girlfriend moved out to California from Ohio, I ended up quitting the band and going back to work for Mesa Boogie for a short period of time. Was still up in Sonoma County. And one day my buddy Brian Gary, the keyboard player that worked with me with Eddie, had moved down here. He called me one day and he said, "Man, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I guess you could say I'm not doing much at all." And he said, "You ought to come down to Nashville. There's a lot going on, a lot of gigs. It's cheap." All this long list of reasons why. So, we talked about it on our end. And it was, "Hey, what do you think about moving to Nashville?" And Angel says, "Sure, let's go." So literally the next thing you know, we're getting rid of stuff and piling the car up and doing our Beverly Hillbillies in reverse. And we, again, it's a never look back situation. Life out here is a lot different. It's a lot slower. It's a lot, well, at the time it was unbelievably cheap by comparison.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore, unfortunately. It's getting a little crazy out here, but it was the right move. And went to work for Gibson for a little while, working on play testing and inspecting guitars before they'd leave the factory. Then that Collin Raye opportunity happened shortly thereafter. I think I was at Gibson for maybe 6 months before that Collin Raye thing popped up.
And you were with Collin for about 3 years, you said?
Little over 3 years, I think, if memory serves. I'd have to draw out a timeline to be certain. But and then in October of 1999, I get a call one day that was totally unexpected. Collin has decided to downsize, and we don't need you anymore. Myself and another fella, Tiger Bell, that played fiddle with him and guitar, we were both let go. And we had just bought our first house. My son was 1 at the time. And all I could think of at that point is, oh crap, we're going to have to sell the house. I didn't know what else to think at that point. And I don't remember who initiated the call, but I ended up on the phone with one of my friends at Mesa Boogie. And it may have been me calling saying, "Hey, if you hear of anything,
yeah,
let me,
as we do
once or twice." And the fellow that I was speaking to said, "Have you spoken to Zach the last few days?" And I said, "Zach Harmon, Metallica Zach? Yeah, yeah. You should call him." And I did. And the next day, I was rehired to go back to work for James. And within, I want to say, a week or so, I was on a plane to Berlin to do a symphony, Berlin Symphony gig with Metallica before they did the symphony record. No, after they did the symphony record, of course, because I had to cram listening to that stuff for the better part of a week, trying to remember arrangements and because they're high pressure. You got to be a pretty talented button pusher to be able to do the switching for those fellas.
Yeah.
And it didn't get any easier after that. Saint Anger and all that stuff. And so that at that point, that was pretty much it for me. I had made the decision the decision had been made for me, obviously, but again, it's a never look back situation. I'm perfectly happy doing what I do. And I have a better life, I guess you could say. I get paid better looking after somebody else than I did having somebody look after me, for sure. But I'd never not do any of it. Looking back at all of it.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. Our current tour, or our current PM on Duran is a guy named Einar Peterson. I interviewed him as well. He had a very similar career to you. Like he just got these calls. He played with Kelly Clarkson, did all these stadiums or, the huge tours for 10 years. And then now he does, stage managing, teching, whatever he has to do. And I asked him and he's like, I'm very fulfilled. Like I did everything I wanted to do musically. Do you feel the same way? Like you got to...
Yeah, I do. I still get to hold an instrument every day.
Mm-hmm.
As we get on into our golden years, what was there was a comment on your Facebook post yesterday or the day before, and I think I followed on with another comment, but it was couple of old school fellas right there, and I never ever thought of myself as an old school roadie, but I guess that's what happens when you've done it for 36 years.
Yeah.
I don't look at myself like that. I look in the mirror and I go, what the hell happened?
Well, I wanted not to make light of the situation. I guess when Jason came on board in Metallica, first tour you guys did was Monsters of Rock.
And that was Jason started. We went to Japan and elsewhere before that happened.
Oh, okay.
And by that time, then I had made my exit, and Andy Batty, who had left back in the mid '80s, came back.
Oh, okay. So you weren't with them on that tour?
No, and then I came back. So the timeline gets a little confusing for me sometimes, honestly, Bernie. I was asked to come back in the middle of all that. I did the second half of the Metallica Guns N' Roses stadium tour. Somehow sandwiched that in, and I remember where I was living, and I was living there when I was playing with Eddie. So I think what I did was, I can't remember if it was before, must have been before.
That was the Black Album, the Guns N' Roses Metallica.
It was still part of the Black Album cycle.
Yeah. So
and they had they had the Use Your Illusions out and all that. Nonsense.
I was going to say, you guys, or Metallica, played the Cotton Bowl in Texas, part of this tour with Van Halen, Dokken, Kingdom Come, and I think Bachman Turner Overdrive. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
But me and my buddies, we had seen Metallica. My first concert was that tour of them opening for Ozzy on the Master of Puppets tour. But I remember us trying to make our way back there, and a bunch of roadies Rhodey's running us off.
Yeah.
I was like, that's probably you.
No. Actually, no. I wouldn't have been at that show.
Yeah.
Actually. Yeah, I wouldn't have been at that show. That was the Monsters lineup, or a part of the Monsters lineup. So I wasn't around at that point. But yeah, you're probably right.
It would have been you.
Listen, Zach said to me one day, we were in Dublin at the RDS, and believe it or not, my mom and dad. My mom still lives in Ireland. I lost my dad a couple of years ago, but they lived in the same house in the Irish countryside for the last 27 years, I want to say. And they came down for the day and hung out at a Metallica show. They've been to several shows that I've done in Ireland over the years. But this was a big outdoor horse ground park like setting, and they came down, and I had a couple of cousins. I got a lot of cousins over there. But we're setting up during the day, and I'm stringing Explorers, and the stagehands kind of gathered around me, looking at James's guitars. Obviously they stand out in the crowd, and a couple of them were asking me questions, and why do you stretch the string that way instead of this way, stuff like that. And I've never ever had a problem speaking to people, answering questions. I have no problem doing it. And Zach came over and said, why do you got to be so nice to these people? Get them the hell out of here. And it was just, it struck me as funny.
Yeah.
That he ran them off from the guys that were helping us on stage, but yeah.
With a career like yours, you said 36 years, 34 years?
Well, 1984 to wherever we are now. Where are we now? So
yeah.
More than that.
We could talk about your gigs all day, man, and probably run into the 2-3 hour mark.
Yeah.
What is it about this type of, what it is? Do you consider yourself a roadie or a tech? That's the big question in this industry.
I have always considered myself a tech,
Mm-hmm.
and I can qualify that, I think, easily by saying that I have a fair bit of technical, quote unquote, technical experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, can I tune a guitar? Sure, I can tune a guitar, and I can polish one, and I can maintain it, and I can, make sure the neck is straight, and make sure the frets are level, and all that. But more importantly, I've always leaned on my technical abilities, learned early on from my grandfather, who was an electrician, and then on to my little high tech job there in California, where I was working on gear that was being sold to the military at that point. And I was, a lead on an assembly line. And I was the guy that was responsible for making sure that all of the wires connected to where they were supposed to be going, and that you didn't have a resistor that was sticking up out of the PC board improperly or not connected, or you didn't have a broken trace on the backside of the board after they came through the wave solder machine and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So what that did is that kind of led me into a very OCD, ask anybody that's worked with me, ask Bobby Schneck. I'll leave it at that. I took my inspiration from Bob Bradshaw, one of the most wonderful people in the entertainment industry. But I would see his work, and I would look at it, and I'd say, all right, that's what I want to do. I see what he's doing here. I'm going to try it this way. And over the course of the years, I guess I've been lucky enough, because of my OCD qualities, to have the opportunity to either fix or improve upon something that I've been handed, or literally start from scratch
and build it.
And that's the most fun that I have. When I was hired to go to work for Tom Hamilton, that was in 2010, Def Leppard were taking a year off. And it just, one thing led to another. I got a call and got hired. And the very first thing I needed to do with him was try every stinking bass amp and cabinet manufactured that we could get our hands on. And we spent a week going through, and I mean, I've got photos and video of this massive mountain of bass amps and cabinets from all these different manufacturers. And we'd go back and forth, and then Captain Crazy Pants would come in and say, no, that's not right, or whatever, and then he'd run off again, and so, we had that to contend with. But we finally settled on what he's using. I believe he's still using the stuff now. But then the next task was to start with the building blocks and put it all together for him.
Yeah.
And by the time I was done, he was very happy. I was very happy. Everybody else was very happy. And I've just kind of done that, whether it's In Excess. I got hired to go to work for In Excess. And one of my first jobs was to build a secondary system for them that they could send out, and dug right into it, man. It's just it's what I do. Same thing with Sav, with Def Leppard.
Yeah.
He was in a transitionary phase when I met him. He was still using Ashdown stuff, but he was interested in trying some other stuff, but wasn't ready yet, and then went to work for Tom. I said, Sav, you got to try this gear. He tried it, hit a couple of notes, and said, make it happen. Next thing you know, I'm wiring 2 complete brand new systems. AB systems, as you'll know, and not necessarily most of the listeners would understand that.
Yeah.
In many cases, we've got 2 complete systems worth of gear crisscrossing around the world.
Yeah.
And actually saving money doing it that way. The money that you spend on that second system is recouped by being able to send something in a sea container rather than, air freight and all that stuff. So.
Exactly.
But I've been fortunate with the majority of the gigs that I've had to be able to dig in and get my hands into. So, to long-winded answer to your question, yeah, I look at myself as a tech.
Right on.
I do, and I'm very happy about that.
Well, you and I shared that gig. Well, not quite shared it. We both did the same gig for Tom Hamilton. I remember when I got it, I was nervous.
Yeah.
I get nervous at any gig. If I get called to do a gig, I agree. It's like, yeah, I'll be there, and then I just spend weeks worrying about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then I could not get a hold of the tech at the time, but I remember Greg Howard saying, call Aiden. He built the rig.
So you used the double wide then? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
How did it work for you?
It did. It worked fine, man. Everything worked great. It was, it was it wasn't, a head scratcher.
Okay. Yeah.
A tour manager that I toured with, we had a monitor guy that wasn't quite up to snuff. And I remember him explaining to me, in a way, this was very early on, so I couldn't really criticize anyone else's work, but he said, most guys, you have to know how to get from A to B to C.
Yeah.
He goes, some guys just know how to get from A to C, so when something goes wrong, they and that's what we had in this monitor guy. So that's how I look at rigs, like if, A to B to C. And no, so it did. To answer your question, the rig worked fine.
Okay. And it was probably, I don't know, it could be simpler now, but back then that's what we had to work with.
Yeah.
I'm in a land now that we're using these AxeFX 3s for everything. It's pretty amazing that a 3-rack space unit takes the place of absolutely everything else.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And listen, that technology is, I'm thankful that I have, some computer savvy tendencies as well, because man, I know guys that, and it's no slight to them at all, that technology is just not for everybody. You know,
I would admit it takes me a while to get my head wrapped around it, but all it takes is for it to click and then I'm okay. But
right. You just got to have, and, you know, in our business, we're not always given the time that we would like to have to learn a new format, a new platform, new technology. We're just expected to do it.
Yeah.
And that happened to me, you know, back in the Axe FX 2 days. I did some work with Guns N' Roses, and they were using the 2s, and there was no computer involved. We were programming that stuff from the front panel, and man, I'm sure there might be a few folks listening to this that can sympathize, because that is not what you want to do.
Yeah.
So it was frustrating, and for me, it was frustrating. It was banging my head against a wall, because I want to know how it works, you know, and I don't have the time. I've just got to hunt and peck and hope for the best.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And these days it's, you know, I don't know if your camp, but like in our camp, everything's about the weight, how much it weighs.
Well, so, yeah. And, you know, I'll be honest with you in that regard. We've been very lucky in that our guys have been so, what's the word I want? Sav has never, I've just done it. I've just done it.
Mm-hmm.
And he flies in, and I hand him a bass and I say, here's what I've done this time. And he'll hit a few notes and he'll just grin at me, you know, and that's it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he actually asked me, we were in Abu Dhabi last month for the finals of the F1 race, and I couldn't believe it. He asked me to add a little bit of treble to the sound for the show. And it's the first time, other than, you know, maybe a level check, because he still listens to cabinets on stage. He doesn't wear ear monitors, you know. So he actually asked me to change the tone of things. And that's for the first time since 2002 that he's done that.
Wow.
You know, so I thought it was pretty funny, actually. But he's given me basically carte blanche. I'll fire him off an email and say, hey, listen, I found these new power amps. I can put 2 of them in the rack. They'll take the place of 3 3-space amplifiers, and they're gonna weigh next to nothing. We'll save some dough. It'll cost X amount to start off, and he just sends a note back and says, "Make it happen, pal. I'll see you in a couple of months."
Right on, man.
You know, so I'm very lucky in that regard.
Yeah,
you're right.
You are.
A lot of bands. You know, the bottom line is, how much is it going to cost to move it?
Yeah, yeah.
And it kind of breaks my heart, because it takes all the fun out of it.
It does, and that's why we have the A and the B rig, and that's, you know. But during that time when no one was working, a lot of people left and started other careers, and we have a lot of new faces doing what we do. What kind of advice would you give somebody new coming in as a guitar tech, bass tech, a backline guy?
Wow, I would say, ask every question that pops into your head, and don't feel less for doing it. You know, there are some guys that have left, and I refused. I did get my real estate license, so I'm dabbling at that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my opportunity when we were forced to stop working, basically. And my wife just said, "Hey, you've always wanted to do this. Why don't you try it?" So I did. But my advice to those guys is, don't be cocky because you've just landed a great gig with a band that you didn't have a year ago, because somebody else has left.
Yeah.
Go into it with humility, which is what I've always done. Go into it being willing to listen to what everybody has to say. You know, if it's the monitor engineer or the drum tech or the stage manager, or, you know, somebody else that has nothing technically to do with what you're doing. And this applies to drum techs and bass techs and keyboard techs and monitor engineers and everybody else. listen, ask questions, and ease into it, because a lot of bands that are finding themselves in the position of losing people that they have relied on for years are not happy about it.
Yeah.
They're not happy about it. They're, our job, our job is to make sure that our guys walk on stage with a smile on their face, or as close to that as you can get on a nightly basis. That's it, right? They've got to be comfortable. They've got to feel good about the fact that you're on their team. And you got a lot of these bands that are missing their favorite tech that worked for them for 40 years. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
So learn from anybody and everybody you can. I've always done that. I always will do that. I don't know everything. I never will know everything, but I've never been afraid of asking somebody for advice if I thought I needed it.
Yeah.
And I guess if that answers your question adequately, I would say that would be the most important thing, is go into it with your eyes open, your ears open, your heart open, and learn from everybody you can. And that's going to help you make your guy more comfortable down the line, I think.
No, man. Answered my question completely. I feel the same way. Even like, I got into this industry late. I was in my 30s when I got into it. But I was very fortunate to cross paths with some veteran techs who just took me under their wing. And I always think about that when someone asks me a question, how to answer it. I always try and treat the locals, as equals. 9 times out of 10, they know that building better than you do.
Of course. And you're gonna be relying on them to help you when
exactly.
the time comes. And
so I feel the same way. Man, how do you feel about the touring industry right now? The state of the touring industry?
Well,
nobody ever asks us.
Nobody ever asks us. No. I am 60 years old this year, and I still can't figure that out. But I saw some truly amazing, life-changing shows and experiences back in the 70s. And I've done a fair bit of research to find out what touring was like back in the 70s and into the 80s. And you can imagine the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I caught the tail end of that a little bit. I think that I feel that I'm very lucky to have lived through that era of music. Some of the shows and the records that I owned and the experiences that I had were amazing. But I see it now as it's obviously a business. It's a money machine. It's handled so differently. And one of the main things that a lot of folks don't realize is that back in the 70s and 80s, when an artist did a record, they would put that record out and then they would go out on the road the next day. And the whole reason for them to be on the road was to promote that record so that people would buy it. And that's when you had your decades of platinum and gold and silver records actually meant something back then. Now, I have some experience with this. I worked with Peter Frampton for a while, and I actually made a trip with him to Washington, D.C. and got to see the Washington, D.C. juggernaut in real life and see what it was. And I didn't go home too happy from that trip. But we were there with Paul Williams. Rob Thomas was there. Who else was with us? We were lobbying Congress to change the way that artists are paid for downloads and likes and listens and things, whatever you call it, these days. Streamings.
Yeah.
And when we were in, we met with 2 Republican members of the House of Representatives and 2 Democratic members of the House of Representatives. And in all 4 cases, we were sitting in their offices in the Rayburn building. And I was there as Peter's assistant, right? So I didn't get involved almost at all with the conversations. I did get a chance to ask a couple of questions and answer a couple of questions, but primarily what this was these guys, these industry heavyweights, Paul Williams.
Yeah.
And, he's the head of, I want to say ASCAP Publishing, right? So we were there to beg these legislators to look at what's happening and try to change, because all the regulations and rules that apply are all based on old circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the exact numbers, but Peter Frampton said to one of these guys, to give you an example, my song, Baby, I Love Your Way, was, what's the word the kids use these days? It was downloaded.
Yeah.
Like 1 million times over the course of a period of time. And he got like $248
wow.
for that, Now, and I'm making the numbers up, but the disparity was so great that everybody in the room, it just went silent. It was like, you're kidding, right? And no, he wasn't kidding. It's brutal. So what has happened, the biggest change that's happened is that it's gone from touring to promote a record to touring to make a living.
Yeah.
And it's all about money, good and bad. But you've got your VIP packages that sell a seat for $750, and you get a picture with the band and you get a little glass of champagne and some finger food, some Ellie Mae's Lady Fingers or something, and then you go sit in your seat down in the front and you have a great time and you've just spent $750. And there's actually repeat offenders. This probably as well as I do. You see the same faces down there 6, 7, 8 times during a tour. You think, holy cow, what, are their kids able to eat? But it's, so that's the biggest change that I see, is that it has become, in the strictest sense, a business. It always was. There was always money flowing and income and all that, but it's changed now to a business that is the fun aspect of it. I mean, I try to have fun. I wouldn't enjoy my life if I didn't. And we have a core group of folks in our crew that, we're on the phone looking for the closest Irish pub, as soon as we get off the bus, kind of a thing, and we all go together and we all hang out. And the next thing you know, we're on the news for, how much whiskey we drank in a bar in North Carolina. And then that gets syndicated and picked up on CNN and Fox News. And next thing you know, we're famous, but so we do our best to keep it light, because otherwise, man, it's too difficult.
Yeah. You start thinking about something above your pay grade, it does become not fun. I've been in those situations a couple of times where I just have to take a step back and go, that's not your gig. That's not for you to worry about. You just got to make sure that guy's happy.
That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. It's rough. This last year, we had we had a big tour that most people know about. And it was from a physical standpoint, it was pretty brutal. And, again, we're all a little older and a little wiser, I like to think. And we plan things out pretty well, but just the physical beatdown of working in a stadium in August in the South, and all of a sudden, there's lightning and rain and thunder and just not just the weather, but just the logistics, how far the stage is from the trucks and how far the dressing rooms are from both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You watch these people whizzing by you in a golf cart, you're limping at that point, because you've walked too much.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot out of you. It takes the fun out of it.
That's the part. That's the part that no one sees.
Yeah.
Or even thinks about.
Yeah.
All they think is like, oh, you've been to a lot of places. You get to hang out with rock stars.
Yeah. and they're right. And I know that I'm blessed to have had this career that I've had and that I have, thankfully. I've seen a million places and I've helped to rock them all, it's, I've been to places that I love: Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Europe, South America, all these places, I love traveling. I don't necessarily, love having to schlep my stuff from one hotel room to another over the course of 6 or 8 months. But I love what I do. I love who I do it for. The logistics of it are very, very hard on me sometimes, physically, mentally, emotionally. But I get to spend days off in places like Lisbon and Tokyo and Osaka and Perth and Adelaide and Omaha, Nebraska. All these exotic destinations. But I get to do that, and how many people in the world don't get a chance to leave home?
I know. I look at it like that. I always say there's so many people without jobs, and there's so many people with jobs who hate their job.
Oh, yeah.
And I have this great job that not only do I get to play with guitars all day, but man, I've been around the world a few times on someone else's dime.
Yeah, and you get to listen to girls on film every night.
You know how to piss off a Duranius, tell him your favorite song is "Hungry Like the Wolf."
Oh man, our front of house guy would play the intro to that through the PA literally every day, and it was because Chad Taylor, our drum tech at the time, I don't remember the exact circumstance, but you hear that little laugh, that little giggle, and oh man, and then next thing you know, everybody's doing the 80s dance on stage, But I'm telling you, and I'll say this out loud in front of all these folks, is that I'm a firm believer in Def Leppard and Duran Duran touring together one day.
It would be a great tour, man.
Oh man, can you imagine? And they're all friends.
I know. Joe came to our show in Dublin and hung out all, the entire day.
Yeah. I saw them. I saw them during the heyday. I saw them at Oakland Arena next to the stadium, and the Reflex was the radio hit. And I remember sitting there going, "Where's the water? I want to see the water come out of the video screen." And all I could hear was the little girl screaming. You couldn't even hear the band.
Yeah.
It was like going to a Beatles show. They were great.
Yeah. Well, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
I think if we bug enough people, Aiden, it'll happen.
Get everybody out there to start talking about it, chit chatting on Twitter and Facebook and all the other nonsense out there.
Well, manifestation works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you call that? Yeah.
You put it out. You put it out in the universe. It's going to work. Well, man, dude, thank you so much for your time. You and I have never met, but we're going to cross paths soon.
feel like I've known you for years.
I know, right? I've heard the stories that, your name always comes up in conversation.
Oh,
And
dear.
I just say, yeah, I know Aiden. But man, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, of course. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. I so much appreciate you actually asking me. I haven't done much like this, and it's great. I feel that somebody cares.
Well, I try and keep this, just very, like I've said this in the last couple of interviews. Like when I first started, I came in with questions, and then I realized I didn't ask any of those, because once the conversation starts, you don't want to interrupt it with a stupid question.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you've got some stuff that is interesting. I hope that I answered you clearly and concisely, and that all of our friends out there, get a feeling for who I am and why I am. And, I look forward to seeing you face to face.
Yeah, man. Yeah. We'll share a meal.
And hopefully one day share a tour.
Right on, dude. That's the goal.
Yeah.
I have one more question. One more question. This is the most important. It's called Is Breakfast Included? And if it was, what would you have?
Ooh, if breakfast included, I'm a big fan of chorizo and eggs.
Dude, I just bought some chorizo today.
Yes.
I was looking up, of course, I grew up eating chorizo and eggs. But today I was at the grocery store and I was like, man, I'm going to make that this week. That's fucking crazy.
And Eggs Benedict is my other weakness. There's a place. So we've been tossing around the idea of relocating at some point and maybe going down to South Carolina. There's a town called Aiken. My wife wants to have horses, and I don't know how that's all going to play out, but we were down there looking at properties last year, and we stumbled into this little diner called Metro Diner. And there's a few of them, I guess, on the East Coast. Had never heard of it. They've got fried chicken Eggs Benedict in that place. Holy crap. And it's a plate of food that's worthy of at least two people. But I would say that's probably got it for me for my favorite breakfast ever.
All right on, man.
Oh, man. But yeah, chorizo and eggs as well,
I know, you can't go wrong with that.
Mm-mm.
You eat it too much, you might have a problem with your arteries.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, man, I like I said, I appreciate your time, and it's great to talk to you, man.
You as well, Bernie. Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. I hope to see you soon. I hope that the holidays are great for you and yours. It's a time of year that I thoroughly enjoy, and it's always stressful, but all of a sudden then Christmas Day is here and I can finally catch my breath. But enjoy it. Great to talk to you. Thanks for thinking of me, and thanks for having me on.
You too, brother. Have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you soon, pal.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Right on. Aidan Mullen. Great guy, huh? We could have gone on and on and on with him about his career. I really love his take on the touring and music industry. He's spot on there. If you want to see Aiden, he's out with Def Leppard on their tour with Motley Crue this next year. Just look over to Stage Right, man, and you might see him. You might see him pop out. Anyway, all right, guys, I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.